Welcome dear friends, welcome to my channel. Today we are going to discuss about an important topic called as peritoneal cavity. So before going to explore this peritoneal cavity, every student must understand the embryological part. So to avoid the confusion, every student must study the embryology part. So as we all know that the third week of development, we might have studied the gastrulation process, the germ layers formation. So here I am just showing you the three layers. So the red color one which I'm going to show, this is nothing but your ectoderm layer. Then here you can see this is your purple color one, that is your endoderm layer. Okay, so this is your endoderm and this is your ectoderm cell layer. Okay, then this blue color one which I'm going to show is nothing but your mesoderm layer. So from this mesoderm layer, so this mesoderm which is going to divide into three different parts. So most medially this is the notochord and this is the neural tube and this is your paraxial mesoderm. On either side of the neural tube we can identify paraxial mesoderm. I just want to label this as PM. Then lateral to the paraxial mesoderm we can identify this is nothing but your intermediate mesoderm. So this from this paraxial mesoderm, what we can identify is somites formation of the somites, and then from the intermediate mesoderm, what we can identify is urinary system. Then lateral to this intermediate mesoderm, we can identify that is nothing but your lateral plate mesoderm. I'm just writing it as LPM. Now, as you can see in this picture, it is two parts: anterior part here and this is the posterior part. Now this posterior part which is near to this ectoderm, anterior part is near to this endoderm. So what is going to happen after a few days, or this endoderm which is going to fold. So this is undergoing a folding called as lateral folding. This is called as lateral folding. So what usually happens is if this endoderm is going to convert or folds this way, so what usually happens, this endoderm layer which is going to attach here, so we can identify it is going to form like a tube. So this tube is called as endodermal tube. So this endodermal tube, from this endodermal tube we can, this is going to form, this is your gut tube. So almost all the GIT is going to develop from this gut tube. Now what is going to happen here is, you have to remember, you have to just be attentive here. So in the same way as the endoderm is going to fold laterally, there is a process called as lateral folding. Even ectoderm and mesoderm also, they're also going to run anteriorly in the lateral folding. Okay, so how it is going to form is this posterior part which is extending anterior like this. Yeah, here you can see that clearly, it is extending like this, and then this anterior part is also going to run anteriorly. So this is how it is going to run anteriorly. Now we can identify that this is two double layers. So same thing here also is going to happen. Okay, so this is the anterior layer and this is your posterior layer. Now, what is the name of this anterior and the posterior layer of lateral plate mesoderm? Or so the posterior layer, this is called as somatopleuric mesoderm. Somatopleuric mesoderm. I just want to name it as SM. Then anterior one, so this is your posterior one, that is called as somatopleuric mesoderm, and the anterior one, so anterior one which is extending further anteriorly and is going to join with each other. This one and this one, they are going to join with each other. Okay, so both anterior are going to join with each other, posterior, and here also you can see the posterior layer which are going to join with each other. So here you can see these two are joining and here these two are joining. So this particular part layer is called as splanchnopluric mesoderm. This is your splanchnopluric mesoderm. Now, this somatopleuric mesoderm, which is near to this ectoderm, splanchnopluric mesoderm, which is near to this gut tube. Now, what is going to happen is the splanchnopluric mesoderm, which is near to this gut tube, which is fused with it. Now, what is going to happen is this gut tube, which is present inside the peritoneal cavity, inside the the lateral plate mesoderm. Now this gut tube, from this gut tube, as I told you earlier, the abdominal organs, they're developing so that they can push into this lateral plate mesoderm in order to form that peritoneal cavity. So as I told you earlier, lateral plate mesoderm, which is going to form the peritoneal cavity, pericardial cavity, and the pleural cavity. This gut tube, which is going to form the abdominal organs, they're pushing into the pleural cavity, sorry, peritoneal cavity, pushing into the peritoneal cavity. So this thing you have to understand. Hello friends. Now I have just explained you the embryological part. Now how to understand the peritoneum. Now we are going to see the dissected images so that we can understand a bit more than that. Now we have just removed the anterior abdominal wall over here. Now we are seeing, after separating the anterior abdominal wall muscles, you can identify the fascia transversalis. There is a deep fascia present underneath it. So we have separated that over here. Now beneath that, we can identify the first layer, which we can identify is parietal peritoneum. So as I told you earlier, parietal peritoneum is developed from somatopleuric mesoderm. Now let us see that. I am going to explain. This peritoneum is a intercommunicated sac. It is a chamber. It is a chamber. It is a sac. It is having two parts, greater sac and lesser sac. Both are communicated with each other through a foramen called as epiploic foramen of Winslow. That I am going to show you in a short time. Now try to understand this parietal peritoneum. Now coming to this parietal peritoneum and the visceral peritoneum, these are the two parts. The parietal peritoneum, which is the outer layer, visceral peritoneum, which is fused or adheres to the surface of the abdominal organs. Now this peritoneum, which is going to convert into folds, and that peritoneal folds, or some places are called as omentum, some places they are called as mesentry, and some places it is called as mesocolon. And not only that, and some places this peritoneum is forming the ligaments. For example, hepatogastric ligament, and also gastrosplenic ligament or linorenal ligament. So these are the ligaments which are formed by the peritoneum only. So the peritoneum is going to convert into the folds, and some places it is called as the ligaments. Some places it is called as ligaments. Now here I have just separated the anterior abdominal wall. Now let me explain you one by one. Now here in this picture we have separated the anterior abdominal wall. So the first parietal peritoneum layer, which I am going to explain here, is we have separated the anterior abdominal wall muscles and then reflected it, and from the umbilicus you can identify a ligament called as falciform ligament. This falciform ligament, which is extending from the umbilicus to the right side. As you all know that right side the organ is liver. So this falciform ligament is a sickle-shaped ligament, and this sickle-shaped falciform ligament, which is extending towards the liver. Now let me show you that. Yes, in this picture, this is nothing but your falciform ligament. As I told you in the first slide, the embryological part, I told you that it is a double layered. Now here you try to observe that this is also a double layer. This falciform ligament is double layered. Here we can identify two layers, and the posterior margin we can also identify the two layers. Now coming to the double layered peritoneal fold, which is extending towards the right side, where we can identify the liver, that is reaching to the liver. And here what's going to happen is this falciform ligament, at the superior surface of the liver, it is going to bifurcate into two parts. So here you can identify this falciform ligament is bifurcating, and right side, which is going to form the superior layer of coronary ligament. And what about left side? Left side, it is forming the anterior layer of left triangular ligament. Now this side, the superior layer of coronary ligament, what is going to happen to this is, now try to observe this. The superior layer of coronary ligament, which is extending towards the right side. Now we are observing the liver specimen from posterior view in order to find out the clear extension of the parietal peritoneum and the ligaments of the peritoneum. Now we have seen the superior layer of coronary ligament, which is reaching or extending on the superior surface of the liver towards right side. After that, this superior layer of coronary ligament, which is extending downwards on the posterior surface of the liver as a right triangular ligament. Now, after that, from this right triangular ligament, the inferior layer of coronary ligament, which is extending towards the left side from the right side. You got my point? It is extending towards the left side from right side. This layer is called as inferior layer of coronary ligament. Now, this inferior layer of coronary ligament, which is extending towards the left side, and it is running on the anterior surface of the right kidney. Can you see a depression here? This impression is formed by anterior surface of right kidney, anterior surface of right kidney. Now behind this inferior layer of coronary ligament, there is a pouch present called as hepatorenal pouch of Morrison. Now let us see that inferior layer of coronary ligament, which is extending towards the left side and running towards this blue color structure, is nothing but your inferior vena cava. Now this peritoneum, which is not covering this area, so the area which is not covered by the peritoneum, that areas are called as bare areas. Bare areas. Now this is the largest bare area of the liver. Now this inferior layer of coronary ligament, which is extending towards the left side and running in the groove for inferior vena cava. Groove for inferior vena cava. Then after that, it is extending further towards the left side on the caudate lobe of the liver. This is called as caudate lobe. Now it is running towards further left side and runs in the fissure. So this is the fissure called as fissure for ligamentum venosum. And see, try to observe this same from this inferior layer of coronary ligament, which is extending towards the left side and running in the groove for inferior vena cava, then running on the posterior surface or on the caudate lobe of the liver, then running in the fissure for ligamentum venosum, and the same right side layer which is running downwards and covering the porta hepatis So this is about the right side layer. Now what happens to the left side layer? So the left side layer, as I told you earlier, that is forming the anterior layer of coronary ligament. Now this anterior layer of coronary ligament, which is extending towards the left side, and further it is forming, running towards the right side, and is forming as posterior layer of coronary ligament. Then after that, it is running in the fissure for ligamentum venosum, and then it is running downwards and covering the porta hepatis. Now from here, this left sided layer, which is extending as the lesser omentum, strictly speaking, it is extending as the anterior layer of lesser omentum. Now this right sided layer, which we have explained from the inferior layer of coronary ligament and all, that is forming the posterior layer of lesser omentum. So what I told you, lesser omentum is nothing but the peritoneal fold. Some places peritoneum is forming some folds, so that is nothing but your lesser omentum. Let me show you that. Yes, here you can identify. So here already we have seen how the right-sided layer and left-sided layer, which are extending on the posterior surface of liver, and the same peritoneal double layer fold, which is extending here as the lesser omentum. So this lesser omentum, it is also called as hepatogastric ligament. Hepatogastric ligament. So this lesser omentum has a free margin at the right side. This free margin, where we can identify is this, the free margin of lesser omentum. Behind that we can identify there is an opening. That opening is nothing but the epiploic foramen of Winslow. So what is the importance of that? So this is the epiploic foramen of Winslow, which is communicating between the greater sac and the lesser sac. Now comes the greater sac and lesser sac. What are these two, greater sac and lesser sac? The name itself, it says that greater sac means the bigger one, lesser sac is the smaller one. Greater sac, which is present in front of the stomach, in front of the liver, in front of this, the greater omentum and all. So entire, after opening the parietal peritoneum layer in the abdomen, already you have entered into the greater sac. Now, through this epiploic foramina, we can enter behind the stomach or posterior surface of the stomach through this epiploic foramina Winslow. So behind the stomach, that is nothing but your lesser sac. In front of the stomach, that is nothing but your greater sac. So that is about the greater sac and lesser sac. Now, that is about the greater sac and lesser sac and communications. Now, we need to understand after covering or extending from the liver to the lesser curvature of the stomach, this is nothing but your lesser omentum. This anterior layer, which is running as the visceral peritoneum, which is covering the anterior surface of stomach. Then after proximal part of the duodenum, proximal part of the first part of the duodenum, then the visceral peritoneum further it is extending at the greater curvature of the stomach as the first layer of greater omentum. Now here you can identify how the first layer of greater omentum, which is extending at the greater curvature of the stomach. Now what happens to the posterior layer? Posterior layer, which is extending towards the stomach and it is running as the visceral peritoneum of the stomach. Then this posterior layer, which is extending posteriorly, and behind that it is forming a ligament here. This ligament is called as lienorenal ligament. Now the anterior layer, which is forming the first layer of greater omentum, posteriorly that is forming gastrosplenic ligament. Here you can identify two layers here. So the anterior one is called as gastrosplenic ligament. Posterior one is called as lienorenal ligament. Now try to observe this picture. After that, the greater omentum is having two layers. The two layers which are going to convert into four layers. Let me show you that. Now this is another picture to make you understand how this uh, two layers of lesser omentum are present on the free margin of lesser omentum, where we can identify in epiploic foramen of Winslow. Now try to observe this picture. This is all nothing but the first layer of greater omentum. Now we have reflected it. So the first layer is becoming like a fourth layer. The second layer, which is extending from the posterior surface of the stomach, that is running as the second layer. That second layer becoming as the third layer. So this two layers are becoming like a four layers. Then this two layers which are becoming four layers, that is extending behind or posterior towards the posterior abdominal wall, and then further it is running anterior. Let me show you that. Now try to see the free margin of lesser omentum where we can identify epiploic foramen of Winslow. Now try to observe this picture. Now what we have discussed is try to observe here. Yeah, here you can identify. So this is the stomach, and here you can identify the first layer and this is the second layer. So the first layer, which is extending down, that is forming the greater omentum and is extending down, and then it is folding and then extending upwards. So the first one becoming like a fourth layer. Now what happens to the posterior layer? Let us see that. So this posterior layer, which is extending down and it is running as a second layer of greater omentum. That second layer further it is extending down and take a diversion and then extends as the third layer. So these two layers are becoming like a four layers. The fourth are the two layers which are extending posteriorly and reaching to the posterior abdominal wall. After reaching to the posterior abdominal wall, further it is descending down, and then running anteriorly further and covers the transverse colon. So here the peritoneal fold between which is present here is called as transverse mesocolon. Then after forming the covering the or suspending the transverse colon, it is extending posteriorly and then further down running downwards, and then it is extending as the mesentry. So this is called as the mesentry. So after that, after covering all those small intestine as mesentery or peritoneal fold, then this posterior layer further it is extending back and is running downwards and enters into the pelvic cavity. So these are the peritoneal folds which we can identify in the abdomen. So the things to remember are: first one is lesser omentum, then greater omentum. The ligaments are gastrosplenic ligament, lienorenal ligament, hepatogastric ligament. And these ligaments names you remember, that's enough. Then in the pelvic region we are going to see further peritoneal folds. Thank you, dear students. See you soon.